has discussed a lot about how we need to work interoperably with our allies and our partners across our nations. But we know we have to be ready to fight tonight. And this panel today, the intent is to get after that and have a great, fulsome discussion on that. In a month and a couple of weeks, June 25th will come upon us. That happened when we thought we were ready, but we really were not. So this mission about being ready to fight tonight is so critical. And I'm so glad we have this great panel that we have here today, who I'm going to briefly introduce. And then they're going to open with remarks, and then we're going to take some questions. First, to my immediate right, we have Lieutenant General Maria Barrett, Commanding General of U.S. Army Cyber. She's a Massachusetts native and commissioned in the Army as a second lieutenant in the RTC program after graduating from Tufts University, which means she's very smart, in international relations. Her previous assignments include as a Deputy Director of Current Operations J3, United States Army Cyber Command, Deputy Commander General Joint Force Headquarters, Army Cyber, and Deputy Commander Cyber National Mission Force, U.S. Cyber Command. To her right, we have Lieutenant General Derek McCauley. He enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces in 1989 and commissioned as an armored officer in the Lord Strathcoma's Horse Royal Canadians. His education includes a Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Manitoba, a Master's of Defense Studies from Royal Military College of Canada, and a Master's of Strategic Studies for the U.S. Army War College. He assumed the duties as the Deputy Commander of United Nations Command at Camp Humphreys in the Republic of Korea in December 2023. To his right, we have newly promoted Brigadier General Don Brooks. That means he has to buy drinks after this event.
You got it, sir.
Okay, you heard him. He assumed the duties as the Deputy Commanding General for Operation for U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense on 20 March 2025. Commissioned into Field Artillery in 1999, BG Brooks has served in a variety of positions throughout several different commands. He previously served as the Commandant of the Army Space and Missile Defense Center of Excellence, Commander of the 1st Space Brigade, Fort Carson, Colorado, Chief of U.S. PACOM's Integrated Space Teams at both U.S. SOCOM and CENTCOM. And last but not least, we have Marcus Garlauskas. He's the Director of Indo-Pacific Security Initiative at the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. He leads this initiative's effort focused on conflict and nuclear deterrence, United States strategy, and building cooperation with allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific region. He's led projects focused on deterrence and defense issues in East Asia as a non-resident senior fellow from August 2020 and assumed his duties as director in January of 2023. Ma'am, the floor is yours for opening comments.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to start off by introducing what Army Cyber does. We deliver 5 capabilities: operate, defend, attack. That's both in the cyber and electromagnetic spectrum. Inform, think about information operations, and influence. So our intelligence arm, we can't do anything without them. And we do this across the globe. We do it for Army commanders. We also do it as part of our Cyber Command mission for 3 combatant commands. We do this across 288 post camps and stations in the Army and 1.2 million users. And so when I get up in the morning, there are many threats that I think about. Nation state, General Brunson talked about some of them, but the number one threat that I think about is China. And so I appreciate you inviting me here today because it's very relevant. I think about it all the time.
Thank you, ma'am. Derek.
Hey, well, first of all, thank you, AUSA, General Brown, General Clark, and certainly the USERPAC team that has just put on an exemplary and such a fulsome experience. It is a privilege to be here, certainly from a coalition perspective. That's what I hope to bring. I guess when we talk to fight tonight, I'd offer two things, and maybe there are questions in itself that we can further unpack. But from a coalition perspective, you heard General Brunson talk about just the weave and the web that is weaved in Korea. But I'd think about all those coalition partners and ask the questions, are all the agreements in place to allow them to fight tonight? The other thing I would offer is that we talk a lot about interoperability. We talked a lot about that over the last couple of days. We talked about the 3 pillars. I think from my perspective, the one thing that maybe gets overshadowed sometimes is culture. And have we really thought about the cultural aspect when we talk about interoperability? And then the last question I'd offer to you is, when you think about interoperability, we use it the same word. I'm just not so sure that everybody in this audience has the same defined end state. And I think as we heard yesterday from the Filipino Army commander, their end state in interoperability may be much different than the end state, for example, that Canada wants when it talks about interoperability with the United States. So as we look at fight tonight, I think those are a couple of things we need to think about.
Okay, thanks. Don.
Good afternoon, sir, and AUSA. Thank you for this opportunity on behalf of General Gainey, the commander of Space and Missile Defense Command. Truly honored to represent our men and women of the command who are spread all across the globe, but primarily based out of Space and Missile Defense Command in Huntsville, at Redstone Arsenal, and then at Colorado Springs, where the operational arm resides. SMDC is a truly unique organization that punches well above its weight class, and I say unique because of 3 primary things. Number 1, we're a Army Service Component Command to 3 different combatant commands, that's SpaceCom, StratCom, and US Northcom. General Gainey is also, number 2, he's dual-hatted as the CG for Joint Functional Component Command for Integrated Missile Defense. And number 3, with the operational arm and some of the institutional aspects of the command with the 1st Space Brigade, the 100th Missile Defense Brigade, the ground-based mid-course defense capabilities in that organization, within our Center of Excellence with the Capability Development Integration Directorate, our schoolhouse, and even our NASA detachment and our technological center. The command truly does blend space, missile defense, high altitude, navigation warfare, technology development, and capability integration into formations in a singular command. Truly, creating that synergy across all domains and dimensions. Eager for your questions and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Marcus.
Thank you, sir. No, I appreciate this opportunity. So in a previous life, before I left government service, I spent a lot of time as an intelligence officer looking at the threats in the Indo-Pacific. And so if we're going to talk about fighting tonight, it's important that we understand the nature of that fight is fundamentally changing right before our eyes. And General Brunson mentioned a little bit about this, but it's important to keep in mind that the adversary's capabilities are growing and their intentions to go beyond just these limited gray zone actions into aggression short of war in a zone where we're very uncomfortable, but well beyond this gray zone posturing. And then the potential, if we do get into a war with China, North Korea, Russia, and some combination, the potential for that war to escalate to even limited nuclear attacks and to become a regional or even a global conflict. These are the sorts of things we need to come to grips with in terms of the nature of that fight tonight. The fact that these adversaries' capabilities and intentions are growing and this increasing alignment between those 3 nuclear-armed adversaries is going to change the scope, scale, and intensity of that fight.
That's good, thanks. Let's give our participants a round of applause for those opening comments. Well done. So let's start with some questions. So Lieutenant General Barrett, as Commanding General of U.S. Army Cyber Command, what are your known and unknown threats that you can talk about looming in the Korean Peninsula? And then after you answer that, I have a follow-on.
Well, I think General Brunson did a great job. I think the threats that are on the Korean Peninsula, the threats that we have to our networks and the critical infrastructure, and we shouldn't be constrained to just thinking about DoD or Army infrastructure when we're thinking about this. We also have to think about the critical infrastructure that we rely upon outside of that. We're looking at, and so this is a North Korean problem set, but we look at things like Salt Typhoon, which is a China malicious cyber actor. that actually is looking at internet service providers and compromising those and those in the telecoms, well, those are the telecoms that all of our networks run across. And so what does that mean to us? And how does that change our strategy? How do we think through resiliency against that problem set? So we can't stay limited just to our own networks. That would be the equivalent of sitting on a fob in a foxhole and then only be facing inward. Right? We really have to put I knew you'd get that one.
Yeah.
Right? We really have to look outward and really think about how to deter that type of really kind of aggression and defend against it with different types of options. It really does have to get outside of that foxhole.
Okay, good. General McCauley, so prior to your current position as a Deputy Commander of USFK, USC, you served as the VJ3 of US CENTCOM. What are some of the CENTCOM-based lessons, and following for others to talk about too, that you're applying to the combined forces environment in the Korean Peninsula?
Yes, thanks. Well, I mean, certainly it's been a privilege over the last 4 years to be serving in a number of organizations for 4 different U.S. generals. So I'm not quite sure I remember who my boss is in Canada anymore, but that's okay. It's really fascinating to come from CENTCOM, Middle East focused, warfighting headquarters, 20 years of experience, and from a coalition perspective, built over decades. And the one thing that was really fascinating when I arrived in Korea was, despite, as General Brunson mentioned, despite 11 nations that are present in United Nations Command and 18 nations that are committed to the peninsula, some of the things that you would think are well established procedurally and just as far as info sharing, etc., just don't exist. General Paul LaCamera, the previous commander, used to say, "We're not 75 years old, we're 1 year old 75 times." And that is probably the truest statement that I've come to see. But the one thing that really has, I think, changed is just the perspective of the nations and the common understanding of how much Korea is connected now to Europe and the other parts of the world. And so that's been a fascinating perspective to kind of see.
Thank you, sir. So I'm going to start with you, General Brooks, and then I want everybody else to chime in on this one. So from your respective areas of operation, how should we organize missile defense forces to fight tonight?
Sir, it's a great question. I would say within Space and Missile Defense Command, that question is truly always on our minds. First, the Army's air defense artillery capabilities, those employment principles are as relevant today as they've always have been. We're looking at how to achieve mass, mix, mobility, integration with our air defenses. And second, the employment of those principles of mutual support, overlapping fires, balanced fires, weighted coverage, early engagement, defense in depth must be considered in relation to the threat in the situation in which we face today and into the future. For example, some recent studies on how we posture ourselves. We've been looking at and studying compositioning several capabilities into one formation instead of having heavy, light, and medium weapon systems and disparate or separate organizations. What does that mix of a formation look like? We've seen really good results of that mixed composition. It allows us to blend capabilities like the indirect fire protection capability for cruise missile defense, Patriots for ballistic missile threats, and then finally that concept of missile defeat truly is a whole of government approach. As we see our adversaries, those threats that our adversaries are building towards us, we have to defeat the scale of threats that outmatch. Their magazine depth is far above and beyond our ability to defend against it. And so what are those non-lethal capabilities that we can bring to bear well left of launch, well left of impact to affect the ability of those lethal capabilities of our adversary, to decrease them, so to buy us back some magazine depth As I've said routinely to General Gainey, it is what is our non-lethal assets and our capabilities? What can we bring to bear to make our lethal capabilities more lethal in their lethal operations?
General Brad, how about you? How do you organize your forces to fight tonight?
Well, so fighting tonight is something that we do every day.
Yeah. I mean, explain. A lot of people initially.
Yeah, I don't think, I think we're the only domain that is currently in contact every single day. Not the only domain, but probably not to the same extent. Every day we wake up, we're in contact, but we also have to do this, set the theater and think through that. And from my perspective, setting the theater, it starts in the homeland where we have to project forces from port to port, and then extends all the way into the operational theater. And so I've got to think about that entire continuum of make the networks resilient. Do we think we're going to make them absolutely impenetrable? I can tell you today, maybe that answer is yes. And then tomorrow a new vulnerability pops out and we're no longer, and we've got to respond very rapidly. We also have to be able to make decisions about what to do when we're contested and have that practice. The CyberGuard exercise that Cyber Command just did got down to echelons and practiced that decision making in a way that they hadn't previously done before. It's about making sure that we're leveraging all of our assets, like the National Guard, right, to get after the non-DoD critical infrastructure that's public or private, using their state active duty authorities, or the state partnership program in assisting building partner capacity with allies and partners. All of that comes together in addition to making sure that we are developing full spectrum cyberspace operations and EW options for the commanders so that at the time when called upon, those things are ready. And so that's the fight tonight. I think the other thing that I would add, and I'm going to foot stomp this on the National Guard and reserves. They have information operations capabilities, they've got cyber capabilities, and you don't have to get on an airplane in this domain to fight. So that piece of mobilization is a little bit different from us. It doesn't have that physicalness of it, of putting troops on a plane and getting to a theater, and we plan for that.
That's good. So Marcus, based off your 12 years of tenure in Korea, what advice would you give those on the panel today and then out in the audience about things we need to be thinking about being ready to fight tonight in our formations?
So if we're going to be ready to fight tonight, that means yesterday we had to be sharing intelligence, we had to have the right C2 in place, we had to be postured. And it's more than just the physical posture. This is the places where I have the biggest concerns, is things like access spacing and overflight. It's about the legal mechanisms and the procedural mechanisms in order to be able to share information, not just the technical mechanisms. It's about having the command and control structure in place so that the allies and partners all understand what their place is in the fight and how we're going to work together, not just for a single baseline scenario, but to understand we may have to fight adversaries in different places and times, in different combinations. We will not get to pick the time and place of the fight. The adversary is going to pick that. And so we have to be postured, ready, psychologically, intellectually, and not just physically, in order to be able to fight that fight tonight.
That's good.
If I could
please go.
just talk about that. I mean, I think, that's the one thing that in this theater that I've seen that may not exist as well as we think it does.
Okay.
I'm going to use Korea as the example. The only nation in Korea that has a SOFA or visiting forces agreement is the United States. So as much as General Brunson talked about the 11 nations that are represented there, all of the forces that are there that are not United States are under diplomatic visas. They do not have the same protection. They do not enjoy the same privileges, I guess, from that perspective. And so none of those things are in place, which means to fight tonight, they have to the start point is to negotiate the agreements at a strategic level, and which means it's probably months in some cases. Now, under contact, of course, things are going to be done faster, but this is something that I think, is perhaps not as well understood because there's many bilateral agreements. And the other point I would talk about, and it was hit upon yesterday, policy. Policies are in place and they're there for reasons. But if we see that the policies are not enabling us warfighters, then I think we gotta do something about it. And then unfortunately, I've seen discussions about policies when it comes to interoperability happening in the last 4 years, but there's not much happening other than that. So there's a lot of talk about it, and these are the things, if we're looking at 2027, we gotta stop talking about the policies, and we've gotta make sure that they support the warfighter and the commanders that are gonna have to make the decisions.
That's good, thank you. So this is for the entire group. How is your command, how's your organization leveraging key capabilities, MDTF, state partnership program, and operation pathways to enhance deterrence and most effectively posture for conflict? Let's start with you.
Well, I mentioned the National Guard with the State Partnership Program. I think the other thing, the National Guard is absolutely critical to some of the efforts that Cyber Command is making with respect to the defense of Guam. And so I think those are key. I think there are probably some, the other partnerships that I think are really critical to the greater mission set is the partnerships with industry. I know we say that, but as we begin to leverage more and more commercial capabilities, and I think this is absolutely the right way to go, because the innovation that is happening in the commercial sector is fantastic. But we now have to view them as an operational partner. Mm-hmm. And I need to be able to call them and ask them a question about, hey, is this particular thing that I just learned about a problem for you? And then likewise, when they identify something that is a problem, don't call a program manager or a contracting officer. There's got to be an operational linkage from them. Take our cloud providers. Do they know who to call so that we can start working this? And they are an extension of the DoD Information Network. It might not say that contractually, but we've got to view them as that as we leverage these capabilities.
Okay, Don, how about you?
Sir, I would say the partnerships are routinely just thought about as we get into phase one, into the various other phases of combat operations, but it's partnerships during phase 0 that are the critical linchpin, I believe, to setting the theater. In setting the theater months, if not years in advance, far less of launch, far less of impact once again, but it really gets after how do we posture ourselves to see, sense, understand, stimulate the environment, that then when we're called to strike, we can do so effectively and efficiently to do things to our adversary, disaggregate or disintegrate their warfighting functions so they fight less effectively and efficiently. And it gives us that opportunity to fight and win. I think in the phase 0 piece, what we do is we've heard about positional advantages yesterday, and that positional advantages in the physical domain, but what we can do in that phase 0 really provides us that positional advantage in the virtual domain across the electromagnetic spectrum, especially in the non-lethal world. And everything that we can do now in phase 0 only sets the conditions and prepares the environment for maneuver to close with and destroy our adversaries, if and when called to do so, sir.
Okay. Sir, how about you? Mark, Derek, Derek, give us your thoughts on those, leveraging those key capabilities.
From the partner's perspective.
Partnership perspective, yeah. Operation pathways and MDTFs.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because in the UNC lens, it's quite small. And so, from a UNC lens, that partnership is really those nations that have committed to UNC, of which the United States leads those organizations. And so, to be quite frank, I don't have a lot to add to that perspective on partnerships, other than, the partnerships that the nations have bilaterally, I think is something that we can't underestimate. is something that perhaps we don't utilize as well as a collective, is understanding maybe the partnerships that they have with a nation that the United States may not, and how does that resource being leveraged to a benefit the greater mission.
Okay, good.
So if I may, General, on the
please,
subject
Mark.
of partnerships, I think there's one other critical element, and that's the partnerships between government, military organizations, and all these countries that we're talking about, the private sector and outside experts provide critical value added. But also, when you look at the nature of modern warfare, so much of the technology that's available in the private sector starts to outstrip what's available to the military. So much of the fight that's going to take place against these adversaries is being fought directly against, as we just heard, against civil infrastructure, against civilian targets. And so many of the opportunities we have to achieve advantage over the enemy, whether it's decision advantage, whether it's informational advantage, or whether it's logistical advantage, require very strong partnership with the private sector, and again with people outside of the government, not just in the United States, but among our allies. And developing the synergies there between the public and private sectors is very complicated, of course. It's hard enough to go within the interagency or the private sector of your own country, but when you have a U.S. military organization partnering with a non-government organization in another country, that becomes even more challenging. But it's vital that we develop that capability to partner across those different sectors in various ways in real time.
Real time. That's good. Let's pull that thread. Don, let's talk with you. How would you do some of those same type of things with academic, industry, and non-traditional? Somebody that we didn't think that we need to work with together.
So I think the key...
Not you, Marcus, Don.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. Sir, I think what we do within our Center of Excellence, within our Tech Center, is that we do that every day.
Okay.
And it is leaning on Georgia Tech, for example, and their research institute and the partnership we have with Georgia Tech to utilize the brightest minds, within the academic world, the academia, but also reaching out through our Tech Center into industry to push the envelope, prototype faster, test and experiment, learn faster. As we fail, learn now instead of waiting till fail in some type of crisis or conflict. Right. One of the biggest hindrances for that, though, sir, is the security classification. And that's something that we do struggle with. We are currently rewriting our security classification guides with space and global missile defense capabilities to open that aperture up. Our schoolhouse has already integrated some of those lessons as we've now are exporting and bringing in our partners and allies into REL 5I and REL additional countries as well for our academic education and leader development, because we realize that we're going to fight, and it's going to be a joint multinational intergovernmental interagency fight. Mm-hmm. And the best way to do that is begin institutionally through the academic world, also through our tech center and technology development. But that's how we're tackling that problem set within Space and Missile Defense Command.
Okay. Maria or Derek, either one?
Yeah, I'll chime in. The innovation, and it's so important to really be leaning into this, and culturally as an organization, we have to be there. If we cede this space, it's only going to be filled by the adversary. You don't have an option. And so we lean on everything. Educational partnerships with 2 universities. We have lab authorities by which we can leverage cooperative research and development agreements, CRADAs, to advance some of the things that we're doing. We have limited acquisition authority for cyber peculiar capabilities to very quickly get more mature capabilities that are available commercially into the hands of the operators, both cyber and EW. Every single one of those things, just you have to be able to organize your own organization towards this end of innovating faster. And again, if you're not doing it, right, if you will, others will prevail, and you can see it. AI, deepfakes, voice, video that is out there, that is the environment that we have to be prepared for, and we don't have an alternative but to go into that space.
Okay. So Derek, let's pull a thread on culture. In your opening comments, you talked about that. Can you give us some other examples of wins or challenges dealing with multiple cultures as they intersect in the combined warfighting environment?
Yeah, so I mean, Dr. McManus talked about the Luzon experience yesterday about, the cultural and how that interoperability and countries being able to choose who they wish to work for and how that played out. I think at times we talk about culture, we talk about it a lot, but we don't really unpack it and see how what it means. And I'll use an example maybe on the Korean Peninsula. It's fascinating from a language perspective. We'll use a word like control, right? Command and control. It's a fairly, I think we all understand what that means.
Yeah.
But if you translate it into Korean, control can actually mean almost an impediment to sovereignty, right? And so, using a word like that, and you can understand General Brunson's three hats, and he uses a word that he's trying to mean, but what it's being translated as means something totally different and sets us off on a path that perhaps doesn't allow us to fully meet the mission and where we need to go. I think the cultural aspect, certainly I've seen more so in the Indo-Pacific than I saw in my time in CENTCOM, to be quite frank, just because there is a multitude of cultures colliding, if you will, but also the fact that now we have a number of other cultures either emerging or re-emerging, because some were here historically, and there's of course cultural baggage there.
Yes.
And now they're reintroducing, and how does that play out as far as our ability to bring together those alliances? Because in some cases, memories are very long, longer than we would wish.
Yeah. Marcus, how about you? The importance of culture and how it applies to the warfighting.
So in Korea, I think you see some of the most striking examples of this, and General McCauley just alluded to this. So there's national culture, and then there's organizational culture, both. And the key to overcoming these cultural challenges and to turn them into positives is to building that understanding and trust. There's so many different occasions that I've seen where in reality the U.S. And an ally were very well aligned on an issue, but because of a difference in a cultural context, it ended up taking a very small, a small divergence, a small difference, a small miscommunication, and actually made it very difficult to accomplish a common goal. And so this particularly is complicated when you have this tendency sometimes to see countries view each other as unitary entities, right? And so if you're talking to an American from the Army or from the Air Force or from the private sector, if you're from another country, you may be thinking, hey, well, these are Americans. They clearly have the same worldview, right? And we do the same thing, right? And so this is the challenge, is recognizing that even within each country, there's different organizational cultures, different modes of speaking, and it requires a tremendous amount of additional time. This is the most critical element. And it's time that has to be spent before fighting tonight. You can't surge trust. It sounds trite, but it's true. You can't surge trust. You can't surge cultural understanding. And it takes a tremendous amount of time, intellectual energy, and priority, right? And some of this, it sounds sort of, for lack of a better term, touchy-feely, right? And you could see a commander saying, why am I having my soldiers spend time on, learning a foreign language or drinking with their soldiers from another country, or learning all the nuances of their culture, when they should be out there at the range? They should be focusing on their lethality. But for the kind of fight that we're going to have to fight in the Indo-Pacific, particularly with land power, that organizational and national cultural understanding is going to be key to having the trust and the speed in order to be able to defeat the adversary.
Yeah, that's good. So one from on the floor, and this is for all of you guys. Let's start with you first, Maria. How can artificial intelligence help you in your mission to provide analytic superiority?
Oh, it gives me speed and it gives me scale across all of our competencies: operate, defend, attack, influence, and inform. So we've got about 10 projects going on right now. They range, and I'll give you this in terms of advice about our journey with artificial intelligence.
Okay.
They range from incubation all the way to heading into production at the end of this year. And I say incubation because you're going to start out with a question and a challenge, and you may find out that you have not framed it or matured it well enough for industry to respond to it. And so you might be in that incubation phase for a little bit. The second thing is, and it's linked to that, we're only really pursuing things that are that high return on investment to operational and strategic objectives. We really have to, the effort with artificial intelligence, we don't want to build a lot of tech debt associated with these initiatives that then aren't really paying off for us. And so we're very discreet in what we're doing. And then I think that the last thing is that for the projects that we do have, we see them, they're going to start off as AI human teaming efforts. But in our mind's eye, they are going to be able to mature through, autonomous decisions and then to semi-autonomous work in full maturity. And we're starting with that end in mind with these projects. And they will go after some of our hardest things, from trying to identify living off the land techniques inside our networks, to, how do we code faster? And again, this is another example. If you seed the space here, they are using it today to throw vulnerabilities at us faster. If you're not doing it, you are behind and you will not prevail.
Yeah. General Brooks, how about you, sir?
No, thanks, sir. I'll add on, ma'am. What AI ML will do for us, it typically takes us just to do a basic target development in the space domain, weeks to months to develop a target. What that will do for us is refine that targeting timeline down to mere seconds. And so now we're generating, it'll allow us to generate relevant effects at the speed of relevancy, at the timing, tempo, and pace of maneuver that maneuver commanders require. Right now it is too slow, but that's, it's not just target development, but it's target development, targeting, and weaponeering. And why is that critical is due to the sheer numbers just in the non-lethal targets that we would be faced with. If I have two shooters shooting at the same target, I consider that fratricide. And so that weaponeering piece, that's where AI will help us, is to decide which weapon system is the most appropriate to fire on that particular target based on geography and geometry to the actual satellite or to the non-lethal reference point to generate effects on a terrestrial target. We drive that every day. It's where we have a new initiative within the command to begin to incorporate AI into some of our actions and activities, and especially into our operations and investments as well.
Okay. Anyone else on artificial intelligence? Thoughts?
Well, I think it was mentioned earlier this week, and I apologize to the speaker. I don't remember who exactly talked about it, but the consuming of information to provide the commander the better picture. And I think from a coalition perspective, if you're a commander that could take in the perspective of some of the cultural norms, some of the thinking that comes from those nations that you're fighting with and that you're fighting, I think that allows us to actually produce better options for the commander.
So this next question is for everybody. We'll start with you, Marcus. In preparing to fight tonight, how should military and government institutions approach the challenge of building the public's readiness, particularly in the information environment, by fostering public trust in state institutions and building resilience against disinformation?
So the critical thing is transparency. We are all too often unwilling to admit unpleasant truths. We're unwilling to open the doors and really engage and with the public and explain to them how dangerous the world it is that we live in, and how we won't always necessarily be able to protect our allies or our own populations from the sort of threats that they face. And so in particular, you see over and over again misunderstandings about what we can or can't do, what our capabilities are, and even sometimes what our policies and intentions are, because we're so focused on security, on protection, on avoiding doing something wrong or saying something wrong, that we allow the enemy to dominate the information environment because they fill the gap. They fill it with their own narrative. So we have to be willing to accept risk. We have to be willing to engage. We have to be willing to show transparency. And we have to revise our procedures, which I think we're starting to do, but not quickly enough, for how we release sensitive information, how we release intelligence information, so that we can provide those facts that will help people understand. But in the end, it means we have to accept more risk, that sometimes we will say something wrong, or we'll reveal something that we didn't want to reveal, just to make sure that the enemy does not dominate the information environment and influence our populations.
Okay. General Brooks, from your perspective.
Sir, I would say the same in the space domain, being very transparent and open to the dangerous actions and activities that our adversaries are doing within the space domain, and then what we are doing to counter that in a bit of a reveal to our adversary, to not only deter but then compel them to stop as well. It's really a coercive atmosphere, and it's more than just deterrence. And so the more we can do that, and I think it goes back to the cultural question and discussion we just had previously, sir, it's getting people comfortable with the domains. It's normalizing what we do, our operations, actions, and investments in those particular domains, to make not only our military, our joint partners, but our international, intergovernmental, interagency, and our commercial partners comfortable with what we're doing in the domain to protect U.S. and our allies and partners' interests, and what we are doing to prevent the adversary from impeding on those interests.
Sure. General McCollum, sir.
That's a big question.
Okay.
I'm going to say right now. I think the difficulty when we start getting into the information domain, when you get into coalition operations, is it's already difficult enough with a domestic audience in a singular nation.
Yeah.
Now you add, pick a number of nations, and how do you script the narrative to be consumed by those nations that may hear words differently and may have different policies or may have different priorities, and how do you shape that? And I think, as the senior military leaders, that's the difficult piece that we have to put together, in which can be done, but I think in many cases, UNC, for example, when we go through our Freedom Shield exercise, we try to place this into context and try to nuance perhaps the message is not the same. And from the fact that what we want to convey, we may have to actually do in a number of different ways to achieve what we want.
Okay.
I'm really struck by the irony that it's easier to do a kinetic operation than it is an information operation.
Mm-hmm.
But that aside, let's just talk about, I agree with everything Marcus said, the transparency, the concept of being self-correcting. There does need to be an element of speed with the messaging, that you have to get out there quickly, or you miss the opportunity to really say, that wasn't a big deal, right? And we see this time and time again. By the time we figure it out, and again, because we're a little bit risk averse, by the time we get out and we say, okay, that event, that particular attack by a nation state actor against this particular infrastructure wasn't really that big a deal, and we're going to call them out, we've missed the mark in terms of defeating their message.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to get faster, and we've got to accept the risk. I think the other thing too is, there's information operations and then there's public affairs. And we have really good things to talk about.
Yeah.
We have awesome soldiers. The United States has very awesome things to talk about. Tell the story. And General Brunson talked about it. Get out there and tell the story in a deliberate fashion. It is not disingenuous. You're being transparent. You're just talking about it. We take for granted the power of talking about it. And that's how you counter the myths and the disinformation as well.
That's good, thanks. So this next question is for Maria and Don to start off with, and then others who want to jump in. The advent of all domain capabilities has provided our allies and partners increased positional advantages, but gaps remain. What priorities should our industry partners focus on to fill the existing deficiencies? Maria, you first, and then Don. Sure.
Yeah, I'll talk about one area that's probably moving pretty fast for the Army, and that is the electronic warfare piece. And so we were taking a look at all the capabilities that have been deployed or that could be deployed, and thinking about, well, that's a lot of kit on the battlefield, but how do we make the bullets for the kit? And so we started to decompose that. How do you take information that's coming off of sensor, identifying it, then getting it to someplace where you can develop the bullet or the payload to fire from the platform. And we want to be very payload centric, not platform centric. And so we just did this pilot during Project Convergence 5, where we did just that and rapidly developed RF technique. We did it using a modular framework, and then we're able to convey that back out to the other platforms rapidly, or put it into an EW arsenal that can be accessed by folks on the battlefield. There's still some work to be done, but really understanding that data architecture to enable that, the development of those bullets. That's a key area from a gap standpoint that I think is really encouraging, and will inform from an industry standpoint, what is it, we'll be better at articulating what we need from you from a format standpoint, in order to make sure that we can go rapidly and we don't have 100 bespoke solutions out there on the battlefield that the operator can't employ quickly.
Okay, Don.
Sir, I would say it's both capabilities and infrastructure. As our adversaries are building more into the low Earth orbital regimes where they are going to proliferate the environment with their capabilities. And we say near ubiquitous, our adversary is ubiquitous. They have enough assets overhead, they can see, sense, and understand us. They stimulate us every day across multiple environments, but especially in the space domain, that it is frightening. So one thing from industry and our partners is on the capability development side, how do we get smaller, more agile, lighter, low signature, that I can move into austere, non-permissive environments, get closer to our adversary into that extreme tactical edge, so then I can start to do forward reconnaissance. And then the infrastructure to get that information back. So we build, every dog in the local area just erupted. I'm good. I'm setting fire alarms off.
Maria.
My tinnitus is like erupting right now in my ears, so it's good times. I'm going to put my hearing aids in a minute, sir. It is, that capability development. It's so we can become better postured in those environments that we can hide in plain sight. And then the infrastructure, as I was getting to before, the weird noise happened. The infrastructure to get that data back as quickly as possible, and then to proliferate that information across the environment with now small, medium, and light weapon systems to let them, effectively and efficiently create that environment. Really presenting windows of opportunity to allow U.S. and allied and partnered forces to close with and hit the X if need be, or deter our adversary or compel our adversary to stop.
Okay, good. So, Don, another question for you. How does the Army view its space forces, and how do we train the Army to fight space-enabled?
Yes, sir. I think the Army, sir, many senior leaders sitting in the room today, General McFarland and others that have, I think over the years, we realize how critically important space is to how we fight today and into the future. I often say that how we used to set the theater with air power and air defense capabilities to establish air superiority or supremacy at the time and place that we wanted to do it. Most of the time, it was all the time. What we face today and into the future is an environment where we are going to need to rely on space and cyber capabilities far left of launch to set the environment, set those conditions, establish superiority or supremacy at the time and place, or when those windows of opportunities that then facilitate air, land, and maritime superiority for the fight. I think as senior leaders, we've continuously have seen improvement over the last 16 years as a space officer of awareness. We are beginning to truly normalize space within the domain, and we see a growing force structure. Even at a time of reduction across our military, we've seen space capability, space formations, units of action, personnel, and funding only increase, because I think the Army truly does believe it is a cornerstone to how we fight and win today and into the future. And then as how we train the Army. Recently signed by General Brito, General Pappas, and Lieutenant General Gainey, the Army Space Training Strategy. It will most likely be published here in the next 30 to 60 days, and it really drives the Army how we train in a denied, degraded, disrupted space operating environment. Not just operationally at home station training or in the CTCs, but also institutionally. What are we doing within our professional military education for U.S. and our foreign partners to better prepare our young soldiers down to the lowest level, to the senior-most professional military education programs, that this is the environment we're going to face. These are the things that we can do to mitigate in that environment, and then how we prepare between that education and then actual execution, and then last but not least, in the leader development and education piece, what we are doing within those various programs to grow leader understanding. So when we do face that environment, we're better prepared.
Yeah. So Maria, for you, let's pull that thread a little bit. So organized to fight tonight requires both people and platforms. Can you describe some of the advancements in cyber and EW that will give our U.S. forces a competitive advantage?
Yeah, I think the one that comes to mind is the one that I just described from an EW standpoint. As I've talked, I recently went up to the Hill and did some office calls, and they wanted to get really focused in on, the box. Right? What were we building? What was the range? And I'm like, whoa, slow down. We've got to learn how to leverage this and get the bullets back into the box so we can shoot them. So it's really important that we take a look at the entire ecosystem and how we're going to support this. That reprogramming piece has to be, we've got to figure out where to put that and where that compute needs to be on the battlefield, as close to the operator as possible. And so thinking through those things will be critically important. On the cyber side of the house, I think where I would, the artificial intelligence piece, the machine learning that we're doing here. If you take a look at how much agentic AI has really matured, and if you go out to Silicon Valley, and they'll even tell you that, hey, what they thought was possible last year is leaps and bounds where it is today. And then I just visited with my capability developers, young soldiers up at the 780th MI Brigade, and they were showing me what they were doing. And again, I drop in on these guys probably every 6 months, and they are mind-blowingly amazing what they're doing it because we've given them the tools. So it's only by the limits of their imagination in terms of the capabilities that we can develop. And then I just want to riff off something Dawn was saying, normalizing these types of capabilities. We're on the cusp of doing that.
Yes, ma'am.
In each one of the theaters. They're each at a different stage, but that really is the most important thing, is how do you now get this targeting process in and to incorporate space. If your planners are coming to you and delivering something to you and there's not an associated information operations plan with you, I'd tell them to go back to the drawing table. Force them to come back and show you something with space layered in, or cyber layered in, or IO layered in. I think if you don't do that, you're not going to get to the normalization that is desirable or necessary.
That's good. So General McCauley, for you, Derek, from your perspective with the UN hat, what are some things that we need to do to make sure the units that your country provides, but also those that you have oversight of, that we can rapidly transition from competition to conflict, given that U.S. and coalition forces may have to operate in a communication degraded environment? What things do we need to do right now?
So when you say we, U.S., we,
all of us,
all of us,
Allah zusammen, kapshi da.
Kapshi da, which is very interesting. What we need to do, I think, is understand what limitations we come with. We need to understand what we're willing to do from a nation's priorities, and then nest that together into an operational plan. The difficulty comes is the information sharing aspect of how do you integrate into that plan to fight tonight if you don't know what the plan is. And so I'll use the Korea example, which is probably most useful for me in UNC. So of course there's a USO plan, no foreign, that's to be expected. Always, I mean, there's always that. Every nation has their own plans. But beyond that, the alliance plan, and when alliance, I had to learn this over a period of time in Korea, that only means US ROC, that doesn't mean anybody else. That plan is not shareable. And yet, there's a dependency and an expectation that 18 other nations, which have decided from the political level and militarily in line to support the safety and security of the peninsula at time of need, are unaware of what they're going to be asked to do at time and space. And I think, it's fascinating as I listen to my panel of colleagues, because 1950, that was capability. Capability was that requirement. I don't think that's the number one requirement probably today. I mean, when you look at the forces that, of course, are in the U.S., the professional and the lethal U.S. forces combined with the ROC forces, I think probably what nations are going to be asked in UNC to provide is effects from space and cyber, which they can do easily without agreements. They don't have to place people in the theater. They can do from their home nation. and how do you leverage that and also material. So, I think that is the key right now from a fight tonight, understanding and ensuring that the nations that we are all going to depend upon understand their role. And to be quite frank, I think that's the number one concern when you look at Indo-PACOM area, because there's competing priorities. And nations that don't call Indo-PACOM home, they may be asked to do something, but nationally and prioritize-wise, if they don't know what they're being asked, then they're going to have to perhaps focus somewhere else.
Okay, good. That's good. So we have a few minutes left. So what I'd like to do is just start with closing comments with you, Marcus, then go down the line of what you want our audience to take away from being ready to fight tonight.
Well, I think one of the most important things is something that didn't come up.
Okay.
Being ready to fight tonight means being ready to fight in a nuclear environment. Our adversaries are developing, expanding qualitatively and quantitatively their nuclear arsenals in the Indo-Pacific. We didn't talk about it. Nuclear attacks in space are a great example of where an adversary could use a nuclear weapon in a way that doesn't kill anyone directly, but could be tremendously disruptive. We need to be ready for that. Our adversaries understand psychologically, politically, operationally, we're not in the mindset of being ready to fight in a nuclear environment. We need to posture the physical capability to be able to respond at multiple levels, and we need to train, plan, prepare, exercise, not just militarily, but even understanding our populations and the interagency, that they need to be prepared for a nuclear threat from our adversaries in the Indo-Pacific. That's the one thing I would like everyone here to take away. We have to be talking about it in these sorts of panels. This should come up much more often. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So I would say, 4 Ps, we've heard them routinely, themes and messages over the last several days. Instead of saying partners, really it's partnerships. It is how we collectively work together with our partners, and so that's why I say partnerships instead of just partners. But it is the partnerships. It is positional. It's our positional advantages, not just in the physical domain, but also in the physical realm, but the virtual realm through the electromagnetic spectrum, and how we get into those positions today with those partnerships and our allies. The permissions, it's the authorities. How do we delegate those permissions and those authorities down to the lowest level possible? We have to be doing that today. Really, we're behind. We should have been doing this years in advance. And then the policy for that, for those aspects as well. Everything all in that to encompass, how do we today start to develop, and we've been developing those, but to reinforce those with non-lethal capabilities, those de-escalations off-ramps on that path to crisis. And so when we do achieve crisis, or we do get to crisis and conflict, we are prepared. We have the positional advantage in the virtual realm and the physical realm to dominate our adversary when called to do so.
That's good. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think, from a coalition perspective, coalitions are messy. Coalitions are, fraught with friction, but they're necessary. And we all realize that that's the way we're going to fight. So, the reality is that if we know that, then let's get after some of the problems that we identify. As one of my bosses once said a few years ago, talking ain't fighting. And so we talk about it, and that's great. And we need to educate and make sure that we do. And I would tell you, the United States and the privilege of having and working in the United States is you can see the power of leadership move miles and move mountains. And so, if we're going to continue to look towards this, understanding there is a time horizon, understanding that there is things that we have to achieve, let's take the things that we need to achieve now out of the equation, because there's going to be other things that we haven't thought of that are going to get in the way that we're going to have to overcome.
That's good. Maria.
Probably 2 things. I don't expect commanders to understand the ones and zeros of everything that is critical to them. But I do expect somebody on their staff to be talking to them about risk and where their risk lies, And going back to that commercial versus organic, soldier provided network, what systems are at risk? Don't just think about the networks. What is the data? What is the particular system? If it's warfighting platform and it's important to you, or if it's the mission partner environment, right? We need to just kind of understand that and weight that. We need to be practiced with making decisions in a contested environment about what we would be willing to do without. I don't think that is an extraordinary thing to practice, because when you do pose those questions about what would we actually sever from the network on a really bad day, that becomes a very emotional event, and it can't be. It has to be done very quickly. Or whether the risk is acceptable and we'll just fight through that, and knowing that there might be a malicious cyber actor inside the wire. The last thing that I would say is, I know we're going to continue to have this tension about where authorities for some of these capabilities lie. And whether it's space or, the combatant command has the IO authorities, or cyber with cyber command. I think to the extent that you can build these into your exercises and try to get to that point where you're going to do some of that planning, and even for real world, start planning for those capabilities, and try to fight past the authority barrier. Because I think even if I were to have the power to give you the authority today to execute your own cyberspace operations, you would have none of the access to the SIGINT necessary to develop those targets. And you wouldn't have the platform, and you wouldn't have the people that were trained and so on and so forth. And so I think we've got to be a little bit more unconventional with our approach. In the meantime, you can't have just a high command and control approach to this, or you're not going to avail yourself of what Dawn and Cyber Command can bring.
That's good. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause for this great panel. And we'll now have closing remarks by our AUSA's President and CEO, General Bob Brown.
Great job, panel. Thanks so much, you guys. Escape while you can. Tremendous panel, just like